October 1415. In the cold mud of northern France, a sick and starving English army stands trapped, outnumbered 2-1 with nowhere to run. Across the field, the might of France waits, certain of victory. But before the sun sets, thousands of French nobles will lie dead, and a young king named Henry will carve his place into legend. This is the story of Agincourt, the day England defied the impossible. Opening hook and historical stakes. It is the summer of 1415. Europe stands on the brink of yet another chapter in the century-long quarrel that historians will one day call the 100 Years' War. On the gray morning of August 15th, sails appear on the horizon, English ships, their wooden hulls groaning under the weight of men, weapons, and ambition. They draw into the harbor of Harfleur, a port on the Norman coast of France. The first planks strike the dock, and a young king sets foot on enemy soil. Henry V of England is 29 years old, a crown still new upon his head, his face marked by a thin scar from an arrow wound, years before the sort of scar that made him look both dangerous and blessed. He has been king barely long enough to taste the power, yet long enough to feel the weight of a fractured realm. England in 1415 is not a kingdom at peace. It is a kingdom remembering betrayal. His father Henry IV had seized the throne from King Richard II, a coup that left old loyalties smoldering into open rebellion. Even after his father's death, there are nobles who toast Richard's name in private halls, and there are men with steel in their hands willing to fight for it. The treasury is empty, bled dry by campaigns in Wales. The realm is restless. Henry knows the whispers. He is young. He is unproven. He inherited his father's crown, but not his father's caution. But Henry is not here to be cautious. To steady England, he has chosen a bold, some would say, reckless path to revive England's claim to the French throne. In his mind, nothing binds a kingdom together like victory over a foreign enemy, and nothing crowns a king more gloriously than conquering France itself. This too is a gamble of prestige. If he fails, the stain will cling to him for life. If he succeeds, he will not merely be king of England, he will be the rightful ruler of France. With him stand about 12,000 soldiers, a mix of longbow archers hardened in Welsh campaigns and men-at-arms who have seen the smoke of battle before. His plan seems straightforward: take several French towns swiftly, then sail back across the Channel to be welcomed as the hero who rekindled England's fortune. Harfleur is to be his first prize. It is not the largest port nor the richest, but it is a door into Normandy. And Normandy is the old heartbeat of England's claim to France, dating back to William the Conqueror. Harfleur's harbor is a dagger pointed inland, and whoever controls it can control trade movement and supply along this stretch of coast. Henry sends messengers to demand surrender. The terms are simple. Open the gates, pledge loyalty to the King of England, and the city will be spared. The reply comes not in words but in silence. The gates stay shut. Henry narrows his eyes at the stubborn stone walls. Behind them, the French garrison readies itself for a fight. He cannot know it yet, but the defiance of Harfleur will be the first ripple in a campaign that will stretch his endurance and the endurance of every man with him far beyond what he imagined. The air is heavy with salt from the nearby sea, the gulls circling lazily overhead as if oblivious to the war about to descend on this port. For Henry, there is no turning back now. The siege begins. Henry's war. Ambition and Harfleur target. The order is given, and the English siege lines begin to take shape. Men drag carts heavy with timber ropes and the grim machinery of medieval war. Siege towers creak into place. Trebuchets, their great counterweights poised like the fists of giants, are hauled forward to the killing range of Harfleur's curtain walls. Henry V has chosen his target with care. Harfleur is no sleepy fishing village. It is a fortified port with thick stone ramparts, stout towers, and a population that has known war before. It lies at the mouth of the river Lézard, a short ride from the Seine, and through the Seine runs the lifeblood of Normandy. Control Harfleur and you gain a foothold from which to threaten Rouen, Paris, and beyond. Lose it, and you hand the French an easy supply route to reinforce their northern coast. From the moment Henry's banners are planted, the political theater is as important as the military one. The fleur-de-lis of France still flies defiantly from the walls, and the people of Normandy watch closely. If Harfleur falls quickly, it will suggest that England's new king has the strength to make good on his claim. If it resists, the message will be that France's towns can endure and perhaps even repel the invader. Henry's plan is blunt but effective: batter the city into submission with relentless bombardment. His heralds deliver one last ultimatum: surrender the town or face destruction. The reply from within is resolute: Harfleur will stand. The first stones fly. From the English lines, massive boulders arc high into the sky, trailing faint whispers before slamming into Harfleur's walls with a thunderous crack. The impact shakes the streets inside, sending dust and shards raining down on the defenders. Each hit is meant not only to break stone but to crush morale. Yet the garrison answers with the groan of its own artillery, mangonels and crossbows sending missiles back across the killing ground, their bolts whistling low over the heads of Henry's men. Henry watches it all with a soldier's calm, his hands clasped lightly behind his back. This is not the reckless glory of a cavalry charge. This is a war of patience, calculation, and attrition. It will test the discipline of his army as much as their courage. And yet, beyond the strategy, there is a personal note in Henry's determination. To him, Harfleur is not merely a town to be taken, it is the first stone in the bridge that will carry him to Paris. If he can plant the red cross of St. George over these gates, every noble in France will know that the young English king has come not to posture but to conquer. The defenders, however, seem to know this as well. Each time the English engines breach a section of wall, masons and townsfolk rush to patch the gap. Buckets of earth, timber beams, and even the furniture of the townspeople are sacrificed to shore up the defenses. The very homes they live in are dismantled piece by piece to keep the enemy at bay. The sound of battle becomes constant. The heavy thump of trebuchet arms, the crash of stone on stone, the hiss of flaming pitch. By night, the flashes of fire on the ramparts light up the dark waters of the harbor, like lightning strikes over a black sea. Henry does not yet know that Harfleur will not fall quickly. And with every day that passes, the true enemy, one far smaller than any knight, will begin its silent march through his camp. The siege begins. The first week of the siege is a rhythm of destruction. By day, the English engines hurl their payloads at Harfleur's walls, the stones spinning in the air before splintering on impact. By night, sappers creep forward under the cover of darkness, digging mines to collapse towers from beneath. The defenders answer with their own fire quarrels from crossbows hiss through the air, and on some days, barrels of burning pitch are rolled down from the battlements, bursting into rivers of flame that force the English back. From the shoreline, the port still seems intact, its masts swaying gently in the harbor wind. But Henry's scouts report that the markets are empty, wells are being drawn low, and the garrison is rationing food. It should only be a matter of time before the town bows to necessity. Henry's confidence is steady, almost serene. This is not the largest fortress he has ever faced, nor the most heavily manned. He wears his armor lightly, moving through the siege lines to speak with his captains, to note where the bombardment is biting into the walls. Every crash of stone is a reminder that time, if nothing else, is on his side. Yet the men in the trenches see a different truth. The ground around Harfleur has become a churned, reeking morass. The summer rains, heavy and unseasonable, turn the earth to mud, thick enough to pull the boots from a man's feet. And in the stagnant puddles that gather between the siege works, something invisible is stirring. Soldiers begin to complain of cramps, fever, and an unrelenting sickness of the bowels. At first it is one or two, then dozens, then hundreds. Medieval medicine has no answer for dysentery. The men call it the bloody flux, and its progress is merciless. Dehydration, weakness, collapse. In the crowded siege lines, the disease spreads faster than any French counterattack. Henry himself remains untouched for now, but he knows what disease can do to an army. Victories have been lost not to steel, but to sickness. In an effort to break the stalemate before disease breaks his men, Henry sends a message to the Dauphin of France, a challenge of single combat. One king, one champion, one decisive blow to settle the question of Harfleur. It is a gambit wrapped in chivalry, a test of honor that could save thousands of lives. No answer comes, not even a formal refusal. So the siege grinds on. The English shift from calculated bombardment to direct assault, launching ladders against the walls, sending men-at-arms to storm the breaches under a rain of arrows. Each time the defenders hurl them back, the streets behind the gates echoing with shouts and the clang of steel. From atop a siege tower, Henry surveys the town. Smoke rises from within the fires of resistance. He tells his captains that Harfleur will break soon, one way or another. But in the pits and trenches, the men mutter a darker truth. If the walls do not fall quickly, the English army may not last long enough to see them fall at all. Disease in the English camp. By the second month of the siege, the English camp is a place of both discipline and quiet misery. The rows of tents, once neatly ordered, are now flanked by shallow ditches meant to drain the rainwater, but they only serve to collect foul pools of stagnant liquid. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, smoke, and human waste. Dysentery, once a creeping threat, has become an army in itself. Men double over in pain mid-conversation, their armor suddenly too heavy to bear. Water barrels, though guarded, become tainted. Flies swarm wherever food is laid out, and the scent of sickness clings to the very soil. The king sees it with his own eyes, rows of pale faces, men wrapped in blankets. Despite the damp heat, their strength leached away by the relentless purging of their bodies. There is no cure, only endurance, and endurance is in short supply. Henry had hoped that his challenge to the Dauphin might force an end to this slow bleed. One duel to decide the fate of Harfleur, it would have been an act to stir the poets. But the Dauphin has left him without reply, as if Henry's words had drifted off into the Channel wind. Inside the city, the defenders know that time is on their side. Every day that passes costs the English more than it costs the French. They watch the enemy's siege lines sag under rain and fatigue, and they hold their gates a little tighter. The king's patience, however, is not infinite. By mid-September, the camp's sick list reads like a roll call of entire companies. Henry begins sending his most afflicted soldiers back across the Channel, not as deserters but as survivors of a different battle won against the unseen enemy in their guts. Others, too weak to travel, are tended in makeshift infirmaries where straw is changed daily to keep the stench bearable. Henry knows that if the siege continues much longer, he may have no army left to march with, so he resolves to force the endgame. The bombardments grow heavier, the mining more aggressive, and on the 18th of September he orders a full assault. Scaling ladders slam against the walls. Archers loose flights of arrows to drive the defenders back from the battlements. Men-at-arms push forward with shields locked, advancing into a storm of missiles. The noise is deafening, the thunk of arrows in wood, the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of men fighting to hold their footing on the mud-slick ground. The French repel the assault, but something shifts in Harfleur. The garrison knows they can hold out against men and stone, but can they hold against a king willing to throw wave after wave at their gates despite disease and death in his own camp? That night, messengers ride out from Harfleur under a flag of truce. They propose surrender if no relief comes by the 23rd of September. Henry agrees. When the day comes, no banners appear on the horizon. No reinforcements march to Harfleur's aid. And on the 22nd, the gates finally open. The English cross the threshold of their first French conquest in nearly 60 years. The victory is real, but in Henry's eyes, it is not enough. The final push and surrender of Harfleur. The morning of September 22nd breaks gray and damp, the kind of weather that makes armor feel heavier and breath hang like smoke in the air. At Harfleur's gate, the defenders file out in a slow, solemn procession. Some carry their weapons reversed in a sign of surrender. Others clutch rosaries, muttering prayers under their breath. The townspeople look exhausted, their clothes marked with soot and grime, their eyes hollow from weeks of constant fear. Henry rides forward at the head of his retinue. His armor gleams despite the weather, and upon his helm rests the golden circlet that reminds friend and foe alike. This is not merely a soldier. This is a king. As he halts before the surrendered gate, the French commander kneels and offers the keys of the city. Henry accepts them with measured formality. There is no boast, no shouted triumph. Only the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows that symbolism matters as much as steel. Inside the walls, the streets are scarred. Stonework lies shattered in the gutters. Houses bear the burn marks of firepots and siege missiles. A few stubborn market stalls still stand, their canvas awnings flapping in the autumn wind, but the air is tinged with the acrid smell of old smoke and the iron tang of dried blood. The English soldiers, weary and worn from the siege, march in with mixed emotions. For some, it is relief Harfleur is theirs, and the constant grind of siege work is finally over. For others, the victory feels hollow. They have buried too many comrades, not from French swords, but from the slow, pitiless work of disease. Henry, ever the strategist, sees beyond the immediate gain. Harfleur is a symbol, the first successful English foothold in France in nearly 6 decades. News of its fall will race across Normandy to Paris and beyond. It tells the French people, your gates can be broken, your walls breached, and your towns claimed. But even as the banners of St. George are raised over Harfleur's ramparts, the reality presses in. The siege has cost him dearly. Weeks of prime campaigning weather have been spent on this single port. His army is diminished, his supply lines stretched thin, and winter is approaching. His advisors urge caution, whispering that the wisest course is to return to England, consolidate his gain, and prepare for the next season's war. Henry's eyes, however, are fixed not on home but inland. Harfleur is not enough. One victory will not bind England's divided nobility to him, nor will it secure the French crown. He has crossed the Channel not for a foothold, but for a march that will show the might of England's king in the very heart of France. So while the garrison he leaves behind begins to repair Harfleur's walls, Henry sends the sickest of his men back to England and stations about 1,000 to hold the new prize. He keeps the rest, roughly 6,000 souls, many still weak from illness, for what he has in mind next. It is not another siege he chooses, but something far more audacious, a long, deliberate march across hostile territory to the English-held port of Calais. A parade of defiance. Henry means for every French noble, every farmer, and every soldier who sees that column to understand one thing: England has come to stay. Frustrations and a changed plan. The victory at Harfleur should have been a moment of celebration, a triumphant first chapter in Henry's campaign. Yet as the banners flutter in the salt wind, the mood in the English camp is muted. The cost has been heavy, weeks lost, thousands sick or unfit for battle, and a campaign season slipping into autumn. Henry's war council gathers in a timber-framed hall commandeered from the town. The air inside is thick with the scent of damp wool and smoke from a struggling fire. His captains, weathered men who have served in Wales, Scotland, and the marches, argue in low, urgent voices. Winter is near. The rains will worsen. The French are mobilizing. The safest course, they insist, is to sail for home. England can return in spring with a fresh, stronger army. But Henry's gaze is fixed on the map before him. His finger traces the road north and east through the plains and villages of Artois to the familiar harbor of Calais, the last great English stronghold in France captured by his forebears and held for decades. The choice to Henry is not merely tactical, it is political theater. Returning home after one modest conquest would invite whispers. The boy king could not hold the field. He dared not face the French in open country. But to march openly and defiantly across enemy land, that would be a challenge to every French noble, a declaration that the crown of England is unafraid. Henry dismisses further talk of retreat. The decision is made. From the wounded ranks he sends his sickest men back across the channel to recover. Roughly 1,000 are left behind to garrison Harfleur to hold the gates and keep the port open as a foothold for future campaigns. That leaves him with about 6,000 soldiers, leaner than when he landed, but still formidable in spirit if not in number. They are a force of longbowmen and men-at-arms, but crucially, they have no mounted knights to match the heavy French cavalry. Their mobility will be by foot, their pace slow, their column vulnerable. Henry knows the risks. The French will not allow him to parade unopposed. Scouts already report that enemy forces are shadowing them, slipping along country roads and through forest tracks, keeping always a few miles distant. Still, the king is resolute. He will march. He will make the French watch as England's standard moves like a red cross through their heartland. And if they wish to stop him, they will have to meet him face to face. On the crisp morning of October 8th, the army files out of Harfleur's gates. Banners ripple in the cool wind. The longbowmen's bows are slung across their backs, their quivers tight against the shoulder. The clatter of armor and the rhythmic tramp of boots echo against the cobbles, then fade into the open countryside. Behind them, the Norman port is left in English hands. Ahead of them lies a hostile land, thinning supplies, and the watchful eyes of an enemy who is already deciding where and when to strike. French shadowing the English march. From the moment the English column leaves the safety of Harfleur, it is as if a shadow has taken form behind them. Scouts return daily with the same report mounted. French patrols linger just out of bowshot, their armor glinting briefly in the pale autumn sun, before they melt back into the hedgerows and wooded lanes. These are not raiders, they are eyes and ears mapping every step Henry takes. Somewhere beyond sight, the main French host is moving too, drawing in men from across the kingdom. The further the English march, the more the French know exactly where they are headed. Henry's intended route to Calais runs along the familiar roads of Normandy, crossing the river Somme before turning north through Ponthieu. But within days, grim news reaches the vanguard. Every bridge across the Somme has been destroyed or fortified. The French have turned the river into a wall. When the English arrive at the first crossing, they find the bridge nothing more than a skeleton of broken timbers charred from fire. On the far bank, French troops wave their banners defiantly before vanishing into the mist. At the second crossing, the bridge is intact but blocked by a palisade bristling with spears. Archers behind it loose a warning volley before the English even attempt an approach. Henry has no choice but to turn south away from the direct path, seeking a fordable stretch of the river. It is a dangerous detour. Every extra mile saps the army's strength and draws them deeper into enemy territory. The days stretch into weeks. Supplies dwindle. The salted meat in the baggage trains grows rancid and the bread damp from the autumn rains begins to mold. Foraging becomes essential, but the French have stripped the countryside bare ahead of them. Villages are empty of grain wells are fouled and livestock is driven off before the English arrive. And still the sickness lingers. Dysentery continues to stalk the ranks, thinning them in silence. The soldiers who remain shuffle onward, their armor chafing against skin rubbed raw by constant wet. In some companies there are as many limping as walking upright. The French, meanwhile, never press for battle. They are patient, herding the English like a hawk herds a rabbit toward the place of their choosing. Henry's column pushes on mile after mile, the banners of St. George visible above the churned mud of the road. His men know that each day without a crossing is another day the French grow stronger, but their king rides at the fore, his expression unchanging, his voice steady in command. At last, after a long, punishing march, they find a fordable point miles downstream from their original route. The crossing is slow, the cold water biting into legs and soaking through greaves. By the time the rearguard reaches the far bank, the sun is already low, but they are across. The road to Calais lies ahead once more. Yet even as the army reforms on the northern side, riders appear on the horizon. One by one, they grow into a line, and the line keeps growing. The French are no longer content to watch from a distance. They are here to block the way. Starvation and crossing the Somme. By the time the English wade across the Somme, the men are gaunt shadows of the soldiers who had landed at Harfleur 2 months earlier. The ford is little more than a shallow bend in the river, but the crossing is slow and miserable, the water icy, the current tugging at their legs, the weight of sodden mail and cloth dragging them down. Those already weakened by sickness stagger as they climb the far bank, some collapsing outright. For days before the army had been on the edge of starvation. The last of the salted beef is little more than gray, slimy flesh that clings to the bone. The bread is streaked with mold. Many men have been reduced to gnawing on boiled leather or scavenging roots from abandoned fields. Their boots are cracked from constant wet, and the skin of their feet has softened to the point where every step tears it anew. The French, still shadowing them, have made certain there will be nothing to steal. Villages along the English path stand deserted, their wells filled with stones, their granaries empty. Any surviving animals are miles away, driven into the forests or hidden behind French lines. Henry's quartermasters record in their ledgers that the army's daily ration is less than half the required, but even that is optimistic. And yet, as miserable as the march is, there is a grim pride in the column. The longbowmen joke in hoarse voices about their stomachs chewing on air, while the men-at-arms trudge in silence, eyes fixed on the muddy track ahead. Some carry small relics or charms against death. Others hum old campaign songs under their breath. Henry rides among them daily. He speaks to the captains about holding discipline, to the archers about keeping their bows dry, to the priests about tending the dying. His presence is deliberate, a reminder that the king suffers the same road, the same rain, the same hunger. When they finally reach the northern bank of the Somme, there is a moment of relief. The worst obstacle seems behind them. The road to Calais is open again. Calais means safety, shelter, and resupply if they can reach it. But before they have marched more than a few miles, shapes appear in the distance. First a few riders, then more, until the horizon itself seems to ripple with movement. Armored knights on massive destriers, banners streaming in the wind, file into view one after another, forming a glittering wall across the road. The French are no longer content to harry from the shadows. They are here in force, and they are not merely blocking the way, they are setting the stage. Henry reins in his horse and studies the line before him. Even at a distance, it is clear the English are outnumbered, perhaps 2 to 1. And this is not a siege. There will be no walls to hide behind, no river to protect the flanks. The march to Calais will not be completed without a battle. French forces appear. At first, the French appear as scattered dots along the horizon, their banners too far to read. But as the English column halts and the mist begins to lift, the dots swell into a living wall. Rank after rank of mounted knights ride into position, their polished armor flashing in the pale light. Spears tilt forward like a forest of steel. The formation keeps growing. What begins as a handful of horsemen becomes a stream, then a flood. Each new arrival fills the gaps in the line until the French front stretches so wide that it seems to swallow the road entirely. And still more banners approach from the rear, blues, golds, and reds, each the colors of a noble house, eager to be part of the kill. To the weary English soldiers, the sight is suffocating. They had known they were being followed, but the reality of the numbers before them is something else entirely. Word passes down the line in muttered voices. 2 to 1, maybe more. The longbowmen, many of them gaunt from hunger and pale from sickness, stand in their worn jerkins with bows in hand. Several are without trousers, bare from the waist down after weeks of dysentery left them too exhausted to bother. The image is half comic, half pitiful, men who have survived the siege at Harfleur, the river crossing, and the long march, now staring at what looks like certain death. Among the men-at-arms, the murmurs grow into anxious whispers. One soldier, his voice cracking, speaks aloud what others are thinking. "We're finished. Outnumbered, starving, and too weak to fight them head-on." Henry hears him. The king turns in his saddle, his gaze sweeping the line. When he speaks, his voice carries cutting through the mutter like a blade through cloth. "I would not, even if I could have a single man more than I do," he says. Do you not believe that the Almighty with these, his humble few, is able to overcome the arrogance of the French, who boast of their great number and their strength? There is no mistaking the conviction in his tone. He swears before God and before them all that he will accept no ransom for his life if they are taken. If they fall here, he will fall with them. The words ripple through the ranks. Some men straighten their backs, others tighten their grip on spear or bow. This is no longer just a battle for survival, it is a stand beside their king shoulder to shoulder, no matter the odds. Henry sends for the priests. Each man is given the chance to confess his sins, to receive absolution, to make peace with his soul before what might be his last dawn. Across the muddy field, the French watch in puzzlement as the entire English army kneels before God. The confessions end. The soldiers rise. They are ready. Henry's defiant speech. The air is cold enough that breath fogs between the men, but the sky above is clear. Henry rides slowly along the front of his army, his horse's hooves sinking into the wet soil with each step. His men watch him, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion, their armor dulled by weeks of hard marching. He stops, turns in the saddle, and addresses them again, not with the booming declarations of a court ceremony, but with the steady, deliberate cadence of a commander who knows the weight of every word. Look well upon the field before you, he begins. This is not their land alone. It is ours by right. Edward III fought here before us. The Black Prince brought them to their knees. The stories of those victories were not written for them alone. They are meant to be joined by what we do here today. He lets the words hang, letting the memory of English triumphs seep into the ranks. The veterans among them nod faintly. Then Henry leans forward in his saddle, voice dropping into a sharp edge. And hear this, the French have said that if they win, they will cut from you the fingers with which you draw your bows. So if you value the hand God gave you, then draw it today with all your strength. Let your arrows speak for you before they lay a blade upon your flesh. A low murmur runs through the longbowmen, part anger, part grim amusement. A few grin tightly, as if welcoming the challenge. Henry's gaze sweeps across the line, catching the eyes of men who have followed him from Harfleur, men who marched hungry and sick yet did not falter. They think us weak because we are fewer. They think us finished because we are tired. But they forget this God is with the just, not the many. The king's voice rises for the first time, and when the sun sets this day, it will set upon the victory of England. A cheer goes up, ragged at first, then swelling as it rolls down the line. For a moment, the hunger, the sickness, the mud, all of it is drowned out by the sound of men shouting, not just for survival, but for the chance to make history. Henry raises a gauntleted hand and the noise subsides. Make your peace with God. Sharpen your arrows. Rest while you may. Tomorrow we will show them what it means to stand against England. The priests return to the lines to finish hearing confessions. The men settle into the mud, eating what little they have left. Some whispering prayers, others polishing their gear by the dim light of the campfires. Across the field, the French army stands unmoving, content to watch, to wait, certain that time is their ally. Henry knows otherwise, preparing for confession and death. The last light of day drains slowly from the sky, bleeding into a deep, cold blue. On the English side of the field, the bustle of an army at work is subdued, quieter than the night before a battle usually is. The men know what awaits them at dawn. Henry walks among them now, not as the distant figure on horseback, but on foot, his sword sheathed, his steps deliberate. He pauses to speak to small groups, asking after their wounds, their families, their hometowns. He makes sure each man sees his face and hears his voice. It is not idle sentiment. In a few hours, many of them may be dead, and he wants them to know their king is here with them, shoulder to shoulder until the end. Along the lines, priests move like dark silhouettes in the dim light, their low voices carrying in fragments. Confess. Absolution. Go with God. The men kneel in the mud, helmets held in hand, bowing their heads as the words of forgiveness are spoken. Some weep silently, others murmur their sins in a rush as if trying to outrun the dawn. The ritual has a strange effect on the air. It feels both heavy and calm, as though the army has been wrapped in a blanket of solemnity. They have made their peace. Now there is only the waiting. Across the field, the French camp is a study in contrast. Bonfires throw warm light across lines of colorful tents. Laughter carries faintly on the wind. The smell of roasting meat drifts toward the English lines, a taunt carried by the breeze. The French, well-fed and confident, are in no hurry. They know they have the numbers. They believe the English will be too weak to fight for long. Henry sees the temptation to answer mockery with mockery, to match the noise with their own. Instead, he issues a strict order: no man is to make a sound. Any who break this silence will lose an ear. The command is harsh, but necessary. Noise carries far in the night, and he will give the French nothing. The English settle into their positions, lying in the damp earth beneath the skeletal branches of autumn trees. Armor is kept close at hand, weapons checked one last time. The longbowmen make small repairs to their gear, waxing strings, testing arrowheads for sharpness. The men-at-arms rest against their shields, speaking only in whispers. Overhead clouds gather. The first cold drops of rain begin to fall, pattering on steel and leather. Before long it becomes a downpour, soaking them to the bone. The ground turns to mud, pooling with water that seeps into boots and bedrolls. There is no fire to dry them, no warm meal to take the chill away. Somewhere in the dark a horse snorts, a man coughs, the rain falls harder, the hours stretch on. Henry does not sleep. He walks the perimeter, pausing at intervals to study the enemy lines, noting the lay of the land and the narrowing of the field between two stands of trees. Every step, every observation is committed to memory. By dawn he will know exactly where his men will stand and where the French will fall. The cold, wet night. The rain does not relent. By midnight the field between the two armies is a black, glistening expanse of mud and standing water. Every footstep sinks with a sucking sound. Armor already heavy feels twice its weight when soaked through. Padded gambesons cling like wet clay to the skin beneath. The English huddle in small knots beneath the skeletal shelter of trees, their cloaks plastered to their backs. Some attempt to sleep, heads resting on shields, but the cold creeps in mercilessly, shaking them awake in shivers. For those stricken by dysentery, the night is a private hell, every trip to the edge of the tree line an ordeal in the freezing dark. From where they lie, the men can see faint glows in the distance, the French bonfires still burning bright, their smoke curling upward like a taunt to the gods. Shadows pass in front of the flames, men walking, eating, laughing. Occasionally the wind shifts and the scent of roasting meat drifts across the field. The English bow their heads, swallowing hard against the ache of empty stomachs. Henry remains awake. He paces the narrow spaces between his companies, a silent figure in the gloom, his cloak sodden, his helm tucked under one arm. He speaks little, but when a man looks up, the king meets his eyes, and for a moment the misery of the night seems shared rather than endured alone. In the black hours before dawn, Henry and his closest captains kneel over a crude map drawn in the mud. By the dim light of a covered lantern, he outlines his plan. The men-at-arms will hold the center in a narrow line, their flanks protected by the forest on either side. The longbowmen will be placed in wedges on each flank with sharpened stakes angled forward to stop a cavalry charge. A hidden detachment of 200 archers will wait in the woods to deliver surprise volleys into the French flanks. It is not a plan for a sweeping victory, it is a plan for survival. But Henry knows that if the French cannot use their cavalry effectively, their numbers will count for far less. Outside the small knot of officers, the rest of the army lies in darkness. The rain drips from the branches overhead, pattering against helmets, pooling in the grooves of breastplates. Men adjust their gear with slow, deliberate movements, checking bowstrings, tightening straps, counting arrows. No songs are sung, no boasts traded. Only the quiet, the rain, and the knowledge that when dawn breaks they will stand in the mud facing the might of France. Somewhere beyond the veil of rain and shadow, the French sleep under dry canvas, unaware that the ground they laugh upon tonight will be the same ground they will bleed upon tomorrow. Choosing the battlefield. Dawn comes pale and reluctant, the rain easing to a fine, cold mist that clings to every surface. The field between the armies, once firm autumn soil, is now a sucking swamp of churned mud. It stretches between two patches of woodland, narrowing just enough to make maneuvering large forces more difficult, a feature Henry has noted with precision. The king is one of the first to rise. He stands in full armor, a golden crown fixed atop his helmet, its polished surface catching the first glimmers of weak sunlight. In the gray light of morning, the crown shines like a beacon, a deliberate signal. He will not hide among his men. He will be seen, recognized, and if need be fought face to face. Henry mounts his small gray horse, its flanks still slick from the damp, and rides slowly across the field he has chosen. His eyes trace the contours, the narrowing tree lines, the sodden earth, the points where cavalry will be slowed and infantry can be funneled. This is where they will stand, and if all goes to plan, where they will break the French. He orders the men-at-arms into a thin, disciplined line at the center. They will be the backbone, holding firm against the initial shock. On each flank he places his longbowmen, instructing them to drive the sharpened stakes carried all the way from Harfleur deep into the soft ground, angled outward toward the enemy. The stakes are thick and brutal, each capable of impaling a charging horse. Weeks earlier, the archers had cursed these stakes, grumbling about carrying the heavy timber mile after mile. Now they understand. Against the mass of French cavalry, they are not just obstacles, they are salvation. In the wooded edges of the field, Henry stations 200 of his best archers hidden from view. Their role is simple and devastating. When the French advance, they will unleash sudden withering volleys into their flanks, breaking momentum and sowing chaos. As the English make ready, the French begin to appear on the rise across the field. Their knights gleam in polished armor, their banners snap proudly in the wind. Yet even in their grandeur there is a flaw. So many have crowded forward for the honor of striking the first blow, dukes, counts, and lords eager for glory, that their formation is swelling with inexperience. Trained men-at-arms have been pushed back to make way for noble pride. Henry watches them with a soldier's eye. Pride can be baited, pride can be broken. By mid-morning the lines are set. Between them lies the mud-soaked killing ground. Henry rides the length of his formation once more, his banner flying in the breeze, the red cross of St. George vivid against the gray sky. He has chosen his ground. Now he must make the French come to him. The Battle of Agincourt. By late morning, the full weight of the French host has gathered on the rise across the field. Their numbers are immense, at least twice the size of Henry's force, and they gleam with the confidence of men who expect to crush an exhausted enemy. Dukes, counts, and high-born knights jostle for position at the very front, eager to claim the honor of capturing or killing the English king. Their formation swells with glittering armor, but the disorder of ambition runs beneath the surface. Henry stands at the front of his line, flanked by the banners of England. His men-at-arms hold the center. The longbowmen form wings to either side, their sharpened stakes now bristling in the mud. 200 archers lie hidden in the woods, waiting for their moment. The king's plan is simple: hold the line, let the French come, and let the mud do the rest. But the French are in no hurry. They have food warmth and overwhelming numbers. Every hour they wait weakens the English further. Henry sees their game starvation and exhaustion as weapons, and knows his army cannot endure another night in the cold and wet. So he takes the risk. At his command, the English lift their stakes and begin to advance across the mud. The movement is slow, every step a struggle in the sucking earth. The French, caught off guard by this audacity, scramble to respond. Henry orders the stakes replanted just 300 yards from the enemy line. Then he raises his hand. A hiss fills the air, thousands of English arrows loosed in perfect unison, arc high before plunging into the French front. Plate armor turns many aside, but the blunt force knocks knights from their feet, stuns horses, and shatters the order of the line. The French vanguard, stung and enraged, launches a cavalry charge. Heavy destriers thunder forward, but the sodden ground is a trap. Hooves sink deep. The momentum falters. Arrows rain down, killing horses and throwing riders into the muck. Some knights struggle to rise, only to be dragged deeper by the weight of their armor. The survivors slam into the English stakes, impaling mounts in grisly fashion. Archers drop their bows and seize mallets, knives, and the very stakes they carried, stabbing through visors and joints in the armor. The hidden English in the woods emerge, loosing volleys into the flanks of the advancing French men-at-arms. Behind the vanguard, the next wave of French infantry pushes forward, but the churned ground is now a morass of bodies, broken weapons, and flailing horses. Panic ripples backward as the retreating cavalry collides with the advancing footmen. For 3 brutal hours the fighting is a press of bodies in the mud. Men slip, vanish beneath the crush, and do not rise again. The English fight like trapped wolves, each man knowing there is nowhere to run. Henry himself is in the thick of it, cutting down any who come near. His armor is streaked with mud and blood, his crown still fixed defiantly atop his helmet. When the French rearguard sees the slaughter below, they hesitate. Their commanders, who had held them back for a final decisive strike, now watch the cream of France's nobility fall before the English line. Piles of bodies, dukes, barons, and knights lie before Henry's men. Then comes the sudden cry from the English rear. French forces are attacking the baggage train. Among the treasures there is Henry's personal crown and a relic of the true cross. The fear of encirclement grips the English. Henry makes a ruthless decision. He orders the killing of the French prisoners to prevent them from rising against their captors if the battle turns. Many soldiers refuse, but enough obey to make the French on the hill recoil in horror. In truth, the attackers in the rear are not a French army detachment, but local villagers seeking plunder. By the time this is known, the killing is done. The French reserve never advances. The field is theirs. The toll is staggering: roughly 600 English dead, but as many as 5,000 French, including 3 dukes, 90 barons, and nearly 3,000 knights. In a single day, France's noble class has been shattered. A French herald approaches under a white flag. Henry asks if they accept his victory. They do. He asks the name of the nearby fortress. Agincourt, they tell him. And so the name is fixed: the Battle of Agincourt. Henry's march to Calais will continue unopposed. In the years that follow, he will press deeper into France, marry the French king's daughter, and be recognized as heir to the French throne. But he will never wear that crown. Dysentery will take him at the age of 35, leaving his infant son, the only English king ever to hold both crowns, to inherit a war far from finished. Yet on this muddy field in 1415, Henry V has carved his place into legend. Outnumbered, starving, and sick, he has defied the odds, shattered the pride of France, and written his name into the story of kings who win not because they are many, but because they refuse to yield. Naming the battle and victory secured. The field is quiet now, save for the groans of the wounded and the low murmur of men moving among the dead. The mud that only hours before had been churned by the fury of battle now lies thick and still clinging to armor boots and the fallen alike. The stench of wet earth mixes with the metallic tang of blood. A French herald rides slowly toward the English line under a white flag. His mount steps carefully around the bodies, the rider's face set in the solemn expression of a man who has witnessed disaster. Henry meets him on the field, his armor dented, his cloak heavy with rain and grime. The herald bows. "We accept it. The victory is yours." Henry's gaze sweeps over the muddy expanse, over the tattered French banners lying half submerged over the silent forest edges that had watched the slaughter. Then he asks almost evenly, "What is the name of that fortress there?" "Agincourt," the herald replies. Henry nods once. "Then this battle will bear that name." It is a small act, but one with weight. To name a battle is to define it, to claim it as an event in history, not just a fight in the mud. From this day forward, Agincourt will be a word that carries both pride and warning. Pride for England, warning for France. Aftermath and Henry's legacy. In the days after the battle, Henry allows his army only a short rest. Calais is still their goal, and the march resumes with the grim efficiency of men who have survived the impossible. French patrols no longer shadow them. No more lines appear on the horizon. The road is open. The victory sends shockwaves through Europe. In taverns across England, men raise their cups to the king who stood against twice his number and won. In France, noble houses mourn the loss of sons, brothers, and fathers. The political wound is deep, so many leaders gone in a single day that entire regions are left without their hereditary lords. Over the next 5 years, Henry presses his advantage. He wins campaign after campaign, and in 1420 forces the Treaty of Troyes upon a weakened France. Under its terms, he marries Catherine of Valois, daughter of King Charles VI, and is named heir to the French throne. It should have been the crowning of an extraordinary reign, but fate intervenes. In August 1422, Henry falls ill with dysentery, the same sickness that had haunted his army at Harfleur, and dies at the age of 35. 2 months later, King Charles VI dies as well. The crown passes to Henry's infant son, Henry VI, the only king in English history to wear the crowns of both England and France. Yet the union will not last. The wars will grind on, the victories will be undone, and the dream of an English France will fade. But the memory of Agincourt will not fade. It will become the rallying cry of generations, retold in chronicles, in the halls of power, and on the stage. The image of Henry V, young, outnumbered, and unyielding, will endure as the embodiment of the impossible victory. And so in the cold, wet autumn of 1415, on a muddy field between two woods, the legend was born.